Hi, and welcome to the Leadership Development Armory, Lesson 6. Today we'll be hearing from Kelly Rodriguez, a licensed marriage and family therapist, about mental health in youth ministry. Please be mindful that because this was recorded on Zoom, the quality of the audio and visuals isn't great, but the quality of the content is exceptional. We hope that this lesson is of value to your ministry. Please enjoy.
So today we're really excited to hear from Kelly Rodriguez. Kelly is a licensed marriage and family therapist in a private practice in California. She's a wife and a mom. And throughout the years, she's been an active leader in youth and worship ministries. She started in the mental health field 12 years ago in different settings within the church, community agencies, and with at-risk youth and undeserved populations. She has training experience in serving children, young youth, adults, families, church leaders needing support with issues such as anxiety, trauma, depression, ADHD, life transitions, and relationships. Her passion and calling includes helping to increase the understanding of the integration of faith and mental health. So we're really excited to hear about what she has to share today. But first, let's begin with prayer. So Captain Emmanuel, can you please pray for us?
Sure, that's great. Lord, we love you and we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to pause in the middle of our day to just learn and hear more about how we can better serve the youth and the young adults that come to us. What a privilege. We thank you for everybody on this call and maybe those that will join or watch this recording later. We thank you for Kelly and for her passion and her love for you and the ministry experience and the work experience she has that will help us today on this call. We love you, Lord. We thank you in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited that you guys are here. And, you know, I love that you're talking about this topic. It's so important. And I often get questions about, you know, how do we talk to the youth about mental health and how do we know? So I'm so glad that you guys are putting this together. And thank you so much for allowing me to serve this way. So with that said, a couple disclaimers. I get really thirsty, so I'll be drinking, taking my little breaks, okay? And also I'll be, you know, feel free to jump in if you have any questions, any comments, you know, let's have a conversation. And I, you know, like Summer was sharing, I do have experience working with the youth within the church and mental health. So bringing those together is like a dream for me. So I'm gonna share a presentation. Let me see if I can handle this. I can do this, right? Let's see. Good?
Yes,
awesome.
we can see it.
Okay. Sometimes it's weird because I feel like when I share, I feel like I'm talking to myself. So I might check in and like, are you there? Okay, let me move this around. So let's talk about mental health. You know, again, if you have any comments, any questions, I have some points, you know, and Summer helped me kind of like point out some important needs there. So I'm going to try to address that as much as possible. But feel free to jump in and questions. I mean, I obviously don't have the answer for everything, but I can definitely give you some input and just direct you to resources as needed. Okay, so first of all, okay, let's talk about mental health, right? So language matters, okay? So I get a lot of sometimes questions about people, or I hear people talking about mental health and mental illness, you know, like they change this around and they move it around. So let's just kind of like get back to basics a little bit and know the difference between mental health and mental illness. And it is, you know, mental health relates to everything that has to do with your psychological, emotional, and social well-being. So we all have that. Everybody has mental health. It impacts the way we think, the way we behave, and the way we feel. So it impacts our relationships, our decisions, our spiritual life, our relationship with God, with others, and with ourselves. So everything is connected. No matter how old we are, we all have mental health the same way that we have physical health, okay? Now, mental illness we're talking about something else, right? So we're talking about a condition, a disorder, a diagnosis. People call it different things, but what it is when your mental health is impacted, right? When it's suffering, right? Same thing that when we have physical illness, right? Something changes, we're impacted by it, whether it is mild or is severe. Mental illness is the same way. There is a spectrum, right? But what matters is knowing that it is a condition, a disorder, or diagnosis that impacts someone's life in different areas. So it's negatively impacting different areas, just mood, thoughts, behavior, relationships, decision, self-esteem, social life. So it is a big difference, right? So we all have mental health, but not all of us have mental illnesses or diagnoses, okay? I put something there, mental illness is not always visible, right? But there are signs to pay attention to. So sometimes you will see the person who is the happiest in the room, and maybe they're struggling with depression. Maybe you'll see the more social person who struggles with social anxiety. So there's a lot of, sometimes we need to be mindful of that. It doesn't always look the way we think. And we just need to pay attention, which we're going to be talking about today. All right. I am going to share some statistics. I'm not sure how big it is out there, but these are statistics from 2019 and also 2022, so the most recent one. And it talks about, and one is from 2020. This keeps changing, but I just wanted to share a little bit about, what the youth is experiencing nowadays. And our youth in our churches, they're not the exception, right? So thinking about, the youth that reported having substance use disorders in the past year, youth who have coped with severe major depression. You can look at the percentages there. And then it talks about youth suffering from at least one major depressive episode in the past year. And that is from Mental Health America. They're the latest the statistics. And also in 2020, 12% of US children ages 3 to 17 were reported as having ever experienced anxiety or depression. So this is the reality we're dealing with. And these are the youth that are coming to our churches, right? So I want to emphasize that for a lot of people, including children and youth, young adults, the church will be the first place where they'll be talking about this kind of issues, if they talk about it, or that someone has the chance to notice something, right? So what an opportunity. It is a great opportunity for us as leaders to be able to help them feel safe at church to talk about these topics, right? And to also let them know that, hey, God cares about this. Like it's okay to bring it up at church. You don't have to be silent or feel lonely, okay? So far, how are we doing? Any questions, any comments? You good? All right. So remember, I'm gonna get a little bit of water and
Kelly,
gonna,
one thing I noticed once when we were having our teen night, we were going through like different subjects. So one of them that night was depression, and just asking the kids like, okay, how do you think people deal with depression, like kids your age? And without like skipping a beat, kids said they cut. Like at first I was thinking maybe just like a mood, like your mood is like, down and like that's kind of how you react. But I was just kind of shocked by across the board, the kids said, oh yeah, you cut. Do you think like that's kind of a very common that you see across the board?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's one of those things that are common, not normal, right? But I'm glad you asked that question, because then it gives you an idea, right? Like they didn't hesitate. They just said like, oh, cutting, And the thing with that is that, yeah, it's becoming, I mean, sadly, almost like a trend. It's like, this is what we do. And for a lot of people, like it's a very complex topic, but a lot of times when people say like, oh, they're just wanting attention, or they just, things like that, which is not true. It's more about a release. Like they don't want to feel some other type of pain. They're trying to dissociate, kind of separate, like not feel something else that may feel too strong, whatever is going on. So cutting feels like something they can do, and something that kind of gets them in touch with their emotions, but not not the emotional pain. They're trying to just handle that. And obviously, again, it's not something you want to see, but I'm glad they said it, because again, the youth church is not an exception to that. And unfortunately, it's becoming more of a thing, and it's not related to seeking attention at all. They're seeking connection. They're seeking to release that pain and channel it somewhere. And cutting feels like one of those sensations that they have control over, So yeah, thanks for sharing that. It happens a lot. All right. So let's think about that, and again, I just love that you're having these conversations, because it can be hard to talk about it as a leader, because we may feel like, oh, like I need to have all the answers, or I need to know everything or something. But sometimes teens, young adults, children just want to be asked about it, like you were saying, just putting the question out there and seeing where they're at, right? So, and when you hear when you hear the conversation, then you feel like, oh, me too. Like nobody knows. For example, nobody knows I'm cutting, but I didn't know all the people were doing it, or even thinking about it, talking about it. It definitely makes you feel more seen and less lonely. Like, oh, it's not something wrong with me. Like there are a lot of people going through it. So let's think about warning signs. What are some things that we need to be looking at? Again, this is obviously general information that is related to mental health. This can apply to different ages. This is not with the goal of diagnosing anybody or pointing out things, but it's more about just increasing that awareness. We have these children and youth, coming in contact with the programs and coming in contact with the church in some type of way. So that's when we get to know them, right? I know that we know the things, the personalities, what they like, they don't like. So let's pay attention to changes in their mood and behavior. Behavior is it's a messenger, so a lot of times you're not going to be, sometimes you will have youth who will be very vocal about their struggles, and they know how to name all those things, like, oh, I have depression, or cutting, or I have anxiety, or ADHD, whatever it is, right? But I'm struggling. But some of them will not be able to even pinpoint that something is happening. So that's when we need to be very aware and notice any changes in their mood and their behavior. Are they isolating, are they suddenly not coming to the meetings for no reason? Are they feeling like, you notice, like maybe they're getting really easily upset, or they come in the group and they're just not talking as much as they used to, or when they're talking, they're feeling very tense, or they're feeling like easily frustrated. They're having, one thing that is big to pay attention to is notice those going through some type of life transition, studying high school, moving houses, new to the church, moving schools, having some type of health issues, having some type of family changes. If I know we don't get the whole story, but we do get part of it. So if something is going on, if there is someone in the youth group who is going to a transition, that is something we need to be looking out for. How is this person handling whatever changes is happening? Even good changes can affect your mental health. So they can be really excited about, I don't know, starting a new job, for a young adult, or they can be studying college, or they can be, a younger one going from elementary to middle school. They can be excited about it, and it can also feel like it's a lot, and it can be overwhelming. So talking about this and paying attention to any life transitions, any family changes, and any changes in mood and behavior. Like I was saying, these are guidelines that we can use for different ages. And it's important, like I was saying, think about behavior as a messenger. A lot of times it's hard because, when the younger ones, like, oh my gosh, like he's acting up and he's disruptive or he's talking, like, oh my goodness, but you know what, even that is communicating something. So sometimes I totally get it, being there, it can be frustrating. And at the same time, it's important to just kind of be curious about what else may be happening there and how can I show up for this person. Okay. That paying attention to these warning signs can definitely help them know that we care, but also God cares. He doesn't want us to just go to the core and be like, oh, everything is great and I'm blessed and I'm happy, but he's like, hey, I can be happy, I can love God, and I can be struggling, so all of that can happen at the same time. So just checking in with you guys. Before I move on to the next point, do you guys have any questions, any comments about warning signs?
I think I'd like to ask the question. I know personally, I always, I'm an oversharer. So like, I'm very comfortable sharing a lot of stuff about my life, but I feel awkward asking people questions because I don't want to feel like I'm pushing them to talk about those kinds of things. So how do you kind of allow, like what kinds of questions do you feel like it's okay to ask when you notice kind of behaviors without like over analyzing or like jumping to conclusions? Like, what do you think are some ways that we can ask those questions in a healthy way that isn't like pushing people to share, but also like being a place where they feel like they can share, if that makes sense?
Yeah, this is a great question. Great question. And you're going, moving into the next point. You're introducing that. So we don't track. If nobody else has any questions about this point in particular, then I'll move on to the next one. Okay. But we can always go back if you have any questions, if anything comes up. Okay. So let's think about this. Okay, what if we notice something, right? What if we notice like, oh my gosh, this person is not coming, or I feel like they're isolating, or I don't know, you notice something, or you are aware that maybe this family recently moved, or any life transitions, right? Those are huge to think about. So how to have these conversations, right? So one of the questions that in a practical way as leaders, how can we be there in a way that is not invasive, right? Like, tell me, because like I was saying before, for some of them, it's easy to share. And for them, it's like, you ask, how are you doing? Fine. How's everything? Good. So you're like, oh, tell me more. I know something is wrong, right? So one of the first things to be aware of and keep in mind when you want to have these conversations, if you're noticing something, is check in with yourself. What is the goal of this question? Am I asking because I'm concerned? Am I asking because I have no clue what is happening? Or I have a clue of what is happening, but I have no idea how to help? How are you feeling before you jump in and check in? Because sometimes we may feel like we want to know, but we're not fully understanding what is happening, which is fine. So first of all, check in with yourself before you approach someone, so you can approach the person. Like if you notice something, it's better to have that mindset of like, I asked, than to have that regret of like, what if, Like, what if I miss something, But, one of the things is that we got to make it in a way that is obviously, guided by God, but also understanding that, am I willing to listen? So be willing to listen. And by that, I mean really listen, because sometimes we may feel the urge to just give a solution, or we may feel like we need to fix something, like especially if we see someone from our youth group that is struggling. Of course, we don't want him to go through that, right? But a lot of times, the first thing that you can do is approach that person. And again, I mean, hopefully this has already been part of the relationship, right? So you're not going to come out of nowhere of, oh, how are you doing? Tell me, right? But if there is that relationship and, and the leadership, you can just check in simple questions like, hey, I noticed last youth group, you seemed kind of quiet. And I was just wondering how you're doing. And that's all. They may shut down and be like, oh no, like, am I in trouble? Or you can say things like, if someone who talks a lot, listen. Even check in with yourself. Sometimes, again, it happens in different relationships, not only leadership, like with the youth, but also sometimes we just have this urge to just jump in and solve and give advice and fix and provide resources, which is great and is needed, right? But the first step is to like help the other person feel like they're really being heard. They feel seen, supported without judgment, right? So maybe, like you were sharing before this about the cutting, right? They said it. That's a good sign. Not a good sign that they're talking about the cutting or that they're doing it, but it's more about like they're talking about it. That's a good sign, you see, because that means they feel safe to talk about it without feeling judged, without feeling like, oh my gosh, you're going to tell me that you just, need to pray more, and again, it just, you can pray about it and also be practical about what is God calling me to do to support this person, right? So they can both happen. So listen. How good of a listener are you? When someone is sharing, I'm struggling, I'm feeling like this, or when someone is quiet, remember that when someone is struggling with their mental health, they're already feeling lonely most of the time. They're feeling like they're getting caught up in their thoughts and just thinking like, I'm the only one going through this. There must be something wrong with me. No one else is going through this, which we know is not true, right? But a lot of times, because we're not talking about it, it feels like that's true. So the main goal of having these conversations is approach it, listen, and ask a casual, doesn't have to be a deep questions like, oh, tell me all of your family story, what's going on? Like, they're probably not going to share that unless they feel really inclined to share. But they're just a simple question, just checking in. Hey, I noticed this morning you've been coming to church late. Usually that's a little different, just wanted to check in. Anything going on? Everything good there? You seem kind of like, even things like this matter. Like, do you notice kids or teenagers or young adults getting to the court like really tired, like their demeanor has changed? That's telling you something. Are they struggling with sleeping? Are they struggling? Are they feeling so anxious that maybe sometimes they can't rest? So those are things that matter. And just doing a simple check-in. Like I was saying here, people struggling with their mental health don't want to feel judged or broken. They want to feel seen, connected, and supported. And at the core level, that's something that we have that that opportunity to help them feel connected. They're seeking connection. They're not seeking attention by saying, oh, I have this, I have that. No, they're wanting to feel connected. Like, I want to feel seen for who I am. Maybe someone is going to share with you, hey, I'm taking medication, or I've been struggling with anxiety, panic attacks, or I feel really nervous when you ask me a question in front of the class because I am very anxious, so things like that matter, but you don't have to. I remember we're coming from a mindset of, okay, how can I show up for this person? and help them feel like the church, the core is a safe place for them to talk about these things, you know. So if you notice something, it's okay to ask with an open heart and mind. Don't make assumptions. Hear the person's story. You know, obviously as a therapist, I that's one part of my job that I love, is getting to hear people's stories. And once you take the time to do that, it's like something clicks. Like, I make sense. I'm not broken, you know. And isn't that what God does for us as well, right? So everything kind of comes together like, oh, okay, there is hope for me. And that's what is so important. Before I move on, are there any comments or questions about how to have these conversations, kind of questions, how to approach if we notice any type of changes? No? Okay, sounds good.
I think I just personally really liked what you said about forgetting like yourself in that way, you know, and I feel like that's really how we can be the church, right? Is by putting others first and not thinking about your own personal gain, your own personal like desires in it. But I just really like the way that you phrase that.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that feedback. Yeah, so let's do it. You know, let's not be shy to talk about these topics. And let me share, how can we minister to a child or young adult who's struggling with the mental health? You know, how can we do that? So let me something here. So one of the things is kind of similar to what I was saying before, like check in with yourself. If you notice something it needs to be addressed, check in with yourself, like, okay, you know, how would I talk about this? You know, don't go out of, you know, just like, I want to help, I want to fix, you know, I want to know what's going on, but like, okay, let me make sure I know how to talk to this person. And also, obviously, depending the age that you're talking about, you do want to, you know, talk to the person, but also you want to think about what is their support system like, right? Like, do I need to talk to one of the parents, for example, because maybe what you're seeing at church may be different than what they see at home. So it's more about working as a team and having these conversations so you can minister more effectively. So one of the things that is important to think about is be aware of your role as a leader, right? Your role is not to diagnose. Your role is not to say if someone has this or that. Your role is not to just say, okay, you should do this or not do this. Of course, the guidance and advice is good. You know, you are in a leadership position, you know, that has that, right, involved, but that's not the main thing that a person wants when they're struggling with their mental health. They want to make sure, again, they feel heard, they feel supported. And I put here, don't rush to say things like this. And trust me, I put this ones because I've heard them. I work with clients who are Christian and not Christian, and these are statements that they have heard, you know, when they talk about their mental health struggles. You know, you need to pray more, maybe there is some hidden sin, you need to get closer to God, you just need to have more faith. You know, you may mean well, and again, our spiritual life and our mental health, it is connected and God cares, right? But we need to be very mindful about these statements that sometimes can be dismissive, you know. Sometimes, like I was saying, people like, oh, I'm thinking of going to therapy, or I'm going, you know, or medication or something like that, or a counselor. It's important to think about, like, it doesn't mean that when we don't have faith, it doesn't mean that we're not praying enough, it doesn't mean that it's a consequence of sin. You know, mental illness has a lot of different factors and causes. You know, it can be biological, it can be social, it can be a lot of things. So it's important to like not rush to say things like that. That can be very dismissive, and the person can just shut down, you know, and not talk about it. It's okay to not know all the answers and point people to the appropriate resources. So I said this in the beginning, the church is one of the first places where people are going to talk about these things, whether they do it directly or indirectly. So that's an opportunity that God is giving us to be that bridge, whether we are the person. I'm not saying everybody needs to take medication, or everybody needs to go to therapy, or everything is a mental health crisis. Like, I'm not saying that, but there will be cases where you do need to be mindful of whether it is that safety concerns or other type of concerns that you feel that, you know what, this is kind of like out of my zone, and that's okay. It's okay. You don't need to be a therapist. You don't need to be, like I was saying before, solving all the problems, but just be mindful of what your role is, and just let the person know. First of all, when you have these conversations, is thanking them for sharing. Like, thanks for sharing that. I know it's not easy. Or I imagine you don't have to fully understand what the other person is going through to validate and support. When we talk about having conversations that help people feel validated, we're not talking about like, oh my gosh, I've been there, it's happened to me. Sometimes it will be the case, and good, your story can bless someone else, right? But sometimes you'll be like, oh, I have no clue, I've never been through that, and it's okay. You can validate by saying, thanks for sharing, that must be hard. I appreciate you trusting me. Let's talk together and see how I can support you. That is validation. You don't have to agree. Maybe someone comes to you and they say, hey, I'm feeling so overwhelmed, I'm cutting. So there are two options, right? You can be like, oh my gosh, don't do that, that's horrible, you shouldn't do that, God doesn't like it, that your parents know. I don't know, it can be so many responses, right? Or it can be like, wow, that must be so hard. You're feeling the need to do that. Thanks for trusting me. Thanks for sharing. And you don't have to fully understand why they're doing it, or something like gone through the same thing, to be able to support them and help them feel safe about sharing their story. Okay. So be curious to learn and talk about this topic in general. Like I think that talking about these topics in class, in the youth groups, meetings, it's so important, because right now our children and youth are feeling so much pressure everywhere, and they're hearing a lot about these topics, anxiety, depression, all of these things, traumatic events. And I mean, even more so after the pandemic, like their mental health was really impacted. And sometimes we, again, as the church, we have that opportunity to share and to openly talk about it and let them know, hey, we are a safe place. You have questions, and you have comments, what are your thoughts? It helps them feel like they really can talk about it, and they don't always have to be feeling lonely and that. Okay. So any questions about this? Any comments? So I can drink a little bit of tea. Good. How are you guys are making this so easy?
Hey Kelly, sorry, I do have a question. Hey, I know I think it was last year when they introduced the emergency number 988. Do we know if there's any data as to whether it's being used by people and if it's been overall helpful for the communities?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, that's a very new helpline. So they're still testing it out. They do have, I don't have specific numbers or statistics on that, but what they're noticing is that sometimes, well, first of all, a lot of people don't understand fully how they can get help. So sometimes the people get afraid of reaching out because they feel like, oh, maybe I have to be like in a crisis or a really bad place to reach out. And what if I do? And what are they going to do? Right. So yeah, we don't have specifics on statistics because it's such a new thing. I don't think it has, maybe it's been a year, I'm not sure. But definitely the need that they saw was that they needed something more specific for people who are struggling with the mental health in a way that feels more they feel safer. But together and actually help people feel safer when they make a phone call is a still process. It's a struggle. You know, not a lot of people feel comfortable using it, but definitely there is more curiosity about it. I think people are reaching out, but sometimes again, I think they're just trying to help people understand what it really means to have that resource, and which means again is not that you have to be in a really bad place or in a crisis, but it's more also if you're needing the support and you're in crisis right there, you can call, they can send help, or also if you feel that you're heading there, you can get resources, you know. So yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak because I feel like sometimes I know that when I'm trying to talk to somebody, like if somebody mentions something with like a problem that they're having, I find it's really easy for me to be like, oh, like I felt that way before too. And sometimes it's not the most helpful because sometimes it feels like it's like, oh, what, like, you know what I mean? Like sometimes it feels like not as helpful. I wonder if you have any like tips about like that and like how to find a way that you, because it's really easy to like relate to somebody and be like, I've been through that experience before, but sometimes it's not the most helpful thing to say. Like sometimes people are just kind of wanting to like vent about it, I guess. So like how, what's a good way to kind of interpret that, I guess, and like to kind of have that conversation in a way that you're not like overshadowing, I guess, their experience.
Yeah, that's a really good question, you know, because kind of going back to how to have these conversations, right? We especially, I mean, I speak for myself, sometimes, we may feel this urge to fix and to just like, oh my gosh, like I need to relate, I need to connect, right? And a lot of times, the best way to connect with people is what I was saying, like just really listen, like really, and that is what is known as active listening, active listening is like you're truly listening. You're not listening to jump in and say, oh, I've been there, me too, which is again, it's great to connect with someone on that level, right? Because it kind of gives you some validation and normalizes the experience. But also, yeah, you don't want to make it about you, right? So remember, I was saying that, exactly that example is a really good one. Like, okay, check in with yourself before, because it can also happen that maybe you notice something that you've gone through before. So you feel like, I gotta go because I remember I went through that. I've been there. I've seen that before. So I gotta go and rescue this person. But our job, the first thing is to be able to connect with that person, to help them feel like, hey, I hear you. I'm here to listen. So even saying something as simple as that, like, yeah, I'm checking in, I even sometimes, again, it all depends on the kind of person you're approaching, but if their personality is very much like open and they like to share a lot, they may, out of feeling anxious or something, they may like overshare and share all these things, right? And you're like, oh, wow, that's a lot. Like you're going through a lot, or some will be very quiet, like, because maybe they're not even aware that something is happening, right? So even saying a simple statement like, hey, thanks for sharing that with me, and if you've been through it, again, keep it very, it's good to relate to that in that level, but don't share too much, because the person is really wanting to just release whatever has been there for a while, and you may be the first person who's taking the time to do that. So just really letting, and I know this is a little bit of an exercise of active listening, but I encourage you to pay attention and think about how often you have a conversation with someone and you let them finish a sentence. You'll be surprised. Sometimes we just like, oh, me too. Or, oh, I have this. And the person is like, oh, no, that's not what I was going to say. Or, something like, oh, yeah, but not really. That's not what I was thinking, or that's not what I was feeling. So sometimes even, again, checking in with yourself, listening actively, like you're really paying attention to what they're saying, not making assumptions, not jumping to conclusions, not be like, oh, I knew your family was going through something. I knew, huh? But it's more like, oh, thanks for telling me. It must be hard to go through that, And like I mentioned before, validating someone and making them feel like you're really listening and you're really seeing them, regardless of what they're sharing, because they may share really hard things that you're not prepared for. Or they may not, but it doesn't matter. Everything is all about letting them know what you're saying matters to me. A lot of people, when they're struggling with their mental health, they're going to over apologize. Like, oh, I mean, that's not a big deal. Or I'm sorry I'm saying this. Or I probably shouldn't say that. Hey, let them know everything you're saying matters to me. So if you have that urge to sometimes jump in and say, oh, me too, and share and share and share, pause for a minute and think about, okay, did they finish their sentence? And am I letting them know that they are feeling seen? Like I see you. I'm not seeing you, with a label. I'm not seeing you with anything else. It's like, I see what you're saying. I'm hearing your story, and I appreciate you sharing that. That in itself goes a long way. So, really good questions. Thank you for that. So yeah, I have some resources that I can share, but I didn't add them here. I realized that. So I can send you an email with that if that's okay. And then you can share that if people feel the need to do that. One of the main things with this conversation, just increase awareness again, just helping you feel more comfortable with talking about it. You don't need to be the expert. You don't need to have all the answers. But one thing that is important, just be aware, like just pay attention from a place of compassion, from a place of openness, of like, hey, I don't know a lot about this, but I'm willing to learn so I can actually be there for my group, whatever age. And one thing that I wanted to say too is that, remember, anybody can struggle with their mental health, but no exceptions. No matter the age, no matter the background, they can be struggling in silence. And like I was saying, sometimes the people who smile the biggest will be the ones struggling with something. And sometimes it will be very clear, very obvious that something is going on. So just think about the relationship that you have, with the group that you lead. So you can pay attention to those little messages that you may be getting, and they may not even be aware of it, So a person can live a godly life and struggle with their mental health. God doesn't get nervous to hear these words of anxiety, depression, therapy. Like sometimes we do because it's uncomfortable and we don't know enough about it. But a lot of times understanding and having resources like this one can help us to feel more comfortable to know how to address these situations. So with that, I'm done with my presentation, but I'm open if you guys have any questions or anything, and then I'll be sending some resources that you guys can connect with.
I have a question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing and for your presentation. And then I was just going to say, if anybody wanted to ask questions, please feel free to jump in.
I have a question. In a church setting, you're often working with both the parents and the kids. And the Salvation Army has a lot of rules around protecting youth and protecting the kids. And if a youth, like as you ask these questions and you do these things, if a youth shares with you that they've been contemplating suicide, and you encourage them to ask for help, do we need to tell the parents that? I mean, and I asked that question because I've had a situation in my ministry where a kid was telling me that they were considering committing suicide, and my officer's like, you got to tell the parents, I'm like, no, I don't want to tell the parents. And it turned out she was considering committing suicide because she was being molested by her dad. Like, so, there's all of these things. Like, what responsibility do we have to the parents of the youth who are struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real issue, and I'm so glad you're bringing it up because it happens more often than we'll like. And the reality is, again, a lot of this children and youth, they will be sharing this kind of hard things that we may not be prepared for, right? And suicide is one of those topics that can feel scary and like, okay, what do I do if they tell me this? And a couple of things to keep in mind to answer your question. So if, obviously depending on the age, if it's a minor, you have to assess for different things. Again, you don't have to assess as a professional because obviously, it's not within your capacity to do that. However, when you talk about it, I know that sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to ask anymore because I don't want to increase the risk of them doing something. The reality is that it's been shown that it's the opposite. If we don't talk about it, that increases the risk, right? So we do need to talk about it clearly and ask these questions like, are you thinking of, harming yourself? Are you thinking on ending your life? And sometimes they will not be thinking about that, but you want to ask questions like, are you thinking of sometimes, wishing you just go to sleep and not wake up? Are you thinking of like just feeling like you just want to go far away and not come back? Sometimes that will be a little bit less intimidating and people will be like, oh my gosh, yes. So when you talk about that with a minor and a minor discloses that, there are two things to think about. One is what is called suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation is having the thoughts about like that, like, oh, I feel like sometimes I just want to go to sleep and I don't want to get up. Okay, that happens. You want to tell me more about that. So one is suicidal ideation, having those thoughts sometimes. And the other thing is having a plan and means to do something, right? Now, the risk right there is increased. That you want to take action on, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. You have no control over what's going to happen when the person leaves the court, right? So, however, that's when the relationship you have with this person is so important, right? Because you got to know, remember I was talking about the support system. Do you know the parents or whoever brings them? Like, you do have to let the person know, I'm concerned about your safety, and my goal is to keep you safe. I don't want you to feel that you can't talk to me about it. It's hard. It's a hard conversation to have because you don't know how the other person is going to take it. And they may feel like, oh, I'm never going to tell you anything again if you're going to go tell my parents. Unfortunately, it's something that you got to be willing to deal with because it's better to have a hard conversation now about it and saying, hey, I just want to come together with resources to help you stay safe. So it's all about thinking, okay, what is the severity? Like, are they talking about these thoughts that sometimes they have, which is that ideation, those thoughts can come and go? Or are they planning on acting up on something, like acting on something? Do they have the plans and means, to do something like that? Are they talking about, I'm thinking about taking some pills and having my backpack, or I'm going to go pick him up on my way home? But that's something that you definitely need to talk about with the adult. Again, if it's a minor, it's a hard conversation to have because I know you don't want to break the trust they've had in you. But overall, is harder to think about what could happen if you don't have the conversation. So and again, I think it's something that it's a hard topic, but it's something that is a reality. And when it's about safety, if you don't feel this person is going to be safe, they're talking about specific things, you do want to address this. One thing that is good, because for example, like cases like that, you don't know what's going on at home, and you don't know if you're telling them to trust someone who they're not able to trust, but you don't know that, right? my suggestion is that when that comes up, always bring 2 people that can be part of it, because you don't know what kind of relationship they have with the child. So, or you know, whatever the age is, a minor. If it's someone who is not a minor, then that's something that you have to let them know, hey, I'm concerned about your safety and I want to know how I can give you resources and connect you to make sure that you're safe. You know, can I check in with you? You know, can I, you know, again, if you're talking about some thoughts, okay, you can validate, you can support, give resources, but if you're talking about specific things, you definitely don't want to let them go without any support, right? So again, you know, it's a hard conversation to have and it's a hard topic, but definitely, yeah, I mean, you if there is a safety concern that is actively happening, is important to have the support system. And that's why when we notice something, because sometimes people say, oh, there were no signs. But you know what? Unfortunately, there are signs. There are things that communicate and let us know something is off, something is different. So that's why it's so important to think about those warning signs, right? So if it comes to this, to a conversation about, are you thinking about attempting something, then we already have that idea and hopefully had already come up with a support system for them, have talked to your parents if it's possible, or whoever is bringing them to the core, because that's going to facilitate the conversation. It's not going to be so difficult.
So can I jump into, apart from what Kelly said, Jen, that's a really good question. I think in general, we want to partner with the parents to provide safety for the child. In most cases, we have the kid with us an hour, maybe 2 hours a week. They're spending a lot more time at school and at home. But in cases where we know or the child has expressed that the parent is part of the issue, I think that's where you make the report and let the authorities deal with that. We actually had a real life situation like that where the report had to do with the parent, and we called CPS. They investigated. The dad was livid, like he went to the court officer and mad, and we just said, we're not investigators. What was disclosed was enough for us to call the police. I think they even pulled the kid away from the programs for a while, but ended up coming back. So it's really hard if we think something like that is going to come back on us. I think if we don't think the parents are part of the issue, I think we need to partner with them because they see the kid all the time. But if they're part of the issue, I think it's also proper for us to make sure we're making those calls that then just exclude the person that's probably the part of the problem.
If I can add. For some of you may not know, I'm the Protecting the Mission Coordinator in the Zillow Division. And legally speaking, there has been plenty of times that we have not disclosed to parents because of either suspicion that they are part, would make a scenario worse. And so I have come across when some leadership will say, well, we're mandated reporters. That does not mean we're mandated reporter to parents legally. So, which is kind of controversial in some people's opinion, but legally speaking, we don't have to disclose to a parent. I mean, it's on scenario, but that's why, and Jen, you probably know this, but that's why it's so important to do any kind of NOCs, because just for those that may not know, an NOC, when it gets submitted to THQ, it's looked at by the legal department. And so they'll also advise and give advice of if a parent should be contacted or not. Sometimes it does take an advocate of the youth leader, say, hey, whatever, this situation happened. However, after the last 3 years of being here, this is what my experience is like with the parentals or a parent, and I am nervous by disclosing this to the parent because of X, Y, and Z. And THQ and legal have really, at least in the incidents that I've worked with, they've really looked at that as like maybe we won't disclose to the parents at this time. But I mean, again, it's scenario, but when it's speaking mandated reporter, that does not fall and include to parents. Just so that you guys know.
Thanks,
That's
Sarah.
so good.
Yeah.
And adding to that, because it's great information to have, right? Again, something that you guys mentioned was like, it is not your job to prove anything or have evidence of anything or investigate anything. Like, that's not their role. And that's why it's so important when these things come up to understand your role. So you're clear about it. And yeah, anything that has to do with safety. Yeah, if it's, cases like that is specific about maybe the caregiver is the one who's exposing this kid to a stressful event, then of course you don't want to go there. But thanks for clarifying that. That's very helpful.
I think we maybe have enough time for one more question. If there's anybody else who may have a question for Kelly. Okay, then we can just finish up. Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us about mental health. And we're just so grateful to be able to have you as a resource. And I will be sending out the resources that Kelly sends me next week. So basically how this works for those of you that haven't been in the Armory before is that in 1 week, I'll send out an infographic that kind of has a summary of what Kelly was talking about. I'll also send out the recording of this meeting. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to be hearing from Jim Sparks, and he's going to talk about no budget youth ideas. So if that's something that you're interested in, we are going to be sending out the form for that session and for the rest of the sessions. So our lineup right now is we're going to be talking about no budget youth ideas. We're going to talk about partnering with parents, working with youth and special needs, and creating a safe space for tough conversations. So those are our upcoming sessions. And if that's something that you are interested in, please be on the lookout on our social media, as we will share the forms to sign up for those. Kelly, thank you again for sharing with us. And we're so excited to just be back in it for the Armory. Thank you all for joining. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day. And we're just so grateful for the work that you do for our youth. So bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Kelly.
Bye.